It was just another Tuesday evening when Agent David Carter pulled into the quick-stop gas station off Highway 47. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, but David barely noticed. He'd been working undercover for 3 months straight, tracking down a corruption ring that stretched deep into local government. All he wanted was to fill up his tank, grab a coffee, and head back to his apartment for some much-needed rest. David drove a beat-up Honda Civic, nothing fancy. That was part of staying under the radar. As an FBI agent working undercover, he couldn't draw attention to himself. His clothes were simple too, just jeans and a hoodie. Nobody would guess he was a federal agent with 15 years of experience and countless successful operations under his belt. He stepped out of his car and headed toward the pump. The gas station was quiet with only 2 other cars around. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead and somewhere in the distance a dog barked. David inserted his credit card and began filling up, his mind already on the hot shower waiting for him at home. That's when he noticed the patrol car pulling into the lot. David didn't think much of it at first. Cops stopped at gas stations all the time, just like everyone else. But something felt off. The way the officer was looking at him, even from inside the car, that hard stare that David had seen too many times before in his life. The officer got out of his vehicle. He was a tall man, stocky build, probably in his early 40s. His nameplate read Officer Mitchell. He didn't walk over casually like someone getting gas. No, he walked with purpose, his hand already resting near his belt, near his weapon. "What are you doing here?" Officer Mitchell demanded, not bothering with a greeting or even basic courtesy. David looked up, confused. "I'm getting gas, officer. Is there a problem?" "I'm asking the questions here. What's your business in this neighborhood?" David felt that familiar tightness in his chest. He'd been through this before, though not recently. Growing up as a black man in America meant you learned early how to handle these situations. Stay calm, don't make sudden movements. Be respectful even when respect isn't given back. "I'm just passing through, sir. Getting gas and then heading home." Officer Mitchell stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "You live around here? I haven't seen you before." "I live about 20 minutes away," David explained, keeping his voice steady. "I work in the city and this station has good prices." It was a simple, honest answer. But Officer Mitchell didn't seem interested in simple or honest. He was looking for something, anything, to justify whatever he'd already decided in his mind. "Step away from the vehicle," Mitchell ordered. "Officer, I'm just getting gas. I haven't done anything wrong. I said step away from the vehicle now." David's training kicked in. He knew the law, knew his rights. But he also knew that this situation could turn dangerous fast. He'd seen the news. He'd read the reports. He knew what could happen when things escalated. He raised his hand slightly, showing he wasn't a threat. "Okay, I'm stepping back."
"Can you tell me why I'm being stopped?"
Officer Mitchell moved closer, and David could see the anger in his eyes. It was the kind of anger that had nothing to do with actual crime and everything to do with something else, something darker. "Put your hands on the car. Spread your legs." "Am I being detained?" "What's the reason for the stop?" That question, that simple legal question, seemed to flip a switch in Officer Mitchell. His face flushed red and he grabbed David's arm roughly. "You think you're smart? You match the description of a suspect in a robbery. Now put your hands on the car before I make you." David's heart was pounding now, but his face remained calm. "What robbery? What description?" Mitchell didn't answer. Instead, he yanked David forward and slammed him against the side of the Honda. The impact sent a shock through David's body, and he heard someone gasp. He glanced to the side and saw a woman at the next pump, her phone out, already recording. "Officer, I'm complying," David said clearly, making sure the phone would pick up his voice. "I'm not resisting." But Mitchell wasn't listening. His hands were patting down David's pockets roughly, aggressively, more force than any standard search required. David could feel the officer's anger radiating off him, could hear his heavy breathing. "What have you got in your pockets? Drugs, weapons?" "I have my wallet, my phone, and my car keys." "Nothing illegal." Mitchell pulled out David's wallet and flipped it open. He saw the driver's license, the credit cards, all completely normal. But instead of calming down, he seemed more frustrated. Like he was disappointed he hadn't found something to justify his actions. Another car pulled up to the gas station. An older man got out, took one look at what was happening, and immediately pulled out his phone too. Now there were 2 people recording. "Officer, people are watching," David said quietly, trying one more time to de-escalate. "This doesn't have to go this way." But Officer Mitchell either didn't care or didn't believe it mattered. In his mind, he had the power here. He had the badge, the gun, the authority. And David? David was just another face he'd already judged and found guilty of nothing more than existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. "Turn around," Mitchell barked. "You're coming with me to the station." "On what charges?" "I haven't committed any crime. Resisting arrest. Suspicious behavior. I'll think of more on the way." David's mind raced. He could reveal who he was right now, flash his FBI credentials and this whole thing in seconds, but doing that would blow his cover, would destroy 3 months of careful work, would let actual criminals walk free. The corruption case he was building involved people in law enforcement, maybe even people in this very department. He made a decision. He'd let this play out, at least for now. He'd document everything, stay calm, and when the time was right, the truth would come out. Officer Mitchell had no idea who he was dealing with, and that ignorance was about to cost him everything. Officer Mitchell grabbed David's arm with unnecessary force, his fingers digging in hard enough to leave marks. David could feel the situation spiraling out of control, but he kept his composure. Every word, every action was being recorded by at least 2 phones now, maybe more. This would all matter later. "I'm not resisting," David stated clearly, his voice loud enough for the cameras to catch. "I'm cooperating fully." "Shut your mouth," Mitchell snarled, spinning David around to face him. The officer's face was red, veins visible on his neck. Whatever was driving this anger went beyond a simple traffic stop. This was personal, even though they'd never met before. The woman who'd been recording at the next pump stepped forward slightly. "Officer, he's not doing anything wrong. He's just getting gas." Mitchell's head snapped toward her. "Ma'am, step back or you'll be charged with interfering with police business." She hesitated but didn't move away. "I'm just saying what I see. This man hasn't done anything. I said step back." Mitchell's hand moved toward his weapon, not drawing it but making the threat clear. The woman stepped back, but she kept her phone up, kept recording. David caught her eye for just a second and gave the smallest nod, a silent thank you. Whatever happened next, there would be proof. Mitchell turned his attention back to David. "You people always think you're above the law. Always got an answer for everything, don't you?" There it was. Those 2 words. You people. David had heard them before, knew exactly what they meant. This wasn't about a robbery or suspicious behavior. This was about the color of his skin, pure and simple. "Officer, I don't want any trouble," David said, keeping his voice calm and measured. "I've answered all your questions. I've cooperated with your search. What exactly am I being accused of?" "I told you you matched the description of a robbery suspect." "What description?" "What robbery? Can you tell me when and where this robbery occurred?" Mitchell's jaw clenched. "About an hour ago. Convenience store on 5th Street. David knew 5th Street. It was 15 miles from here, in the opposite direction from where he'd been working all day. But more than that, he could tell from Mitchell's vague answer that he was making this up as he went along. What was stolen? What's the suspect supposed to look like besides, I'm guessing, blackmail? That question hit a nerve. Mitchell grabbed David by the front of his hoodie and shoved him backward against the car again, harder this time. David's head snapped back, hitting the roof of the Honda. Stars exploded in his vision for a moment. "You think you're clever?" Mitchell's face was inches from David's now, his breath hot and angry. "You think because you can talk fancy, use big words, that makes you better than me?" The older man who'd been recording called out, "Hey, that's assault. I'm calling 911. "Go ahead," Mitchell shot back without looking away from David. "Tell them Officer Mitchell is making an arrest. They'll tell you to mind your own business." But David could hear the man on the phone anyway, his voice shaking as he reported what he was witnessing. Good. More documentation. More witnesses. Every piece of evidence would matter. Mitchell pulled David away from the car and twisted his arm behind his back, forcing it up at a painful angle. David grunted but didn't cry out. He wouldn't give Mitchell that satisfaction. "You got anything else smart to say?" Mitchell hissed in his ear. David stayed silent. There was nothing he could say now that would help. Mitchell had crossed a line and he seemed determined to keep going. The officer reached for his handcuffs with his free hand, still keeping David's arm twisted behind him. The metal was cold against David's wrist as the first cuff clicked shut, tighter than necessary. Then Mitchell grabbed his other arm, yanking it back roughly, "You're hurting me," David said. Not as a complaint, but as a statement of fact. Something else for the recording. Should have thought about that before you started running your mouth. The second cuff clicked into place, even tighter than the first. David could already feel his fingers starting to tingle from restricted blood flow. He'd been through handcuff training at the FBI Academy, knew how they were supposed to be applied. This wasn't it. This was punishment. Another car pulled into the gas station and David heard a young voice, maybe a teenager.
Whoa, is that guy getting arrested?
What did he do? Keep moving, Mitchell barked. Nothing to see here, but the teenager didn't move. He pulled out his phone too, and now there were at least 3 cameras recording. The gas station security cameras were probably catching everything too. Part of David felt a grim satisfaction. Mitchell was destroying his own career with every action, every word. But another part of him, the part that was still just a man being humiliated and brutalized for no reason, felt nothing but pain and anger. Mitchell pushed David toward the patrol car, one hand on the cuffs, another on David's shoulder. David stumbled, still dizzy from when his head hit the car. He tried to catch himself, but with his hands behind his back. He couldn't. He went down hard, his knee hitting the pavement first, then his shoulder. "Get up," Mitchell commanded, standing over him. "I'm trying," David said through gritted teeth. "Kind of hard with my hands cuffed behind my back." Mitchell reached down and grabbed the chain between the cuffs, hauling David up by it. The metal bit into David's wrists, and this time he couldn't help the gasp of pain that escaped. The woman who'd first started recording had tears running down her face now. "Please, officer, you're hurting him."
He hasn't done anything wrong.
"Lady, I'm warning you for the last time. Back off or you're next." She backed up but kept her phone steady. David wanted to tell her it was okay, that she'd done enough, that she should stay safe, but he couldn't form the words. The pain in his wrists, his knee, his shoulder, it was all consuming now. Mitchell dragged David to the patrol car and pressed him against it, face first into the hot metal. The evening sun had been beating down on the vehicle all day, and the surface burned against David's cheek. "You're going to learn some respect," Mitchell said, his voice low and menacing. "By the time I'm done with you, you're going to wish you'd just answered my questions and kept your mouth shut." David closed his eyes, focusing on breathing, on staying conscious, on remembering every detail. Because this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Officer Mitchell thought he held all the cards, thought he could treat people this way without consequences. He had no idea that the man he was brutalizing wasn't just another victim who'd be too scared or too powerless to fight back. This was all being documented. Every shove, every slur, every violation of proper police procedure. And soon, very soon, Officer Mitchell was going to learn that actions have consequences, and that the badge on his chest didn't make him immune to justice. What happened next would be burned into David's memory forever. Officer Mitchell wasn't satisfied with just making an arrest. Something in him needed to dominate, to prove his power, to inflict pain. Maybe it was the cameras watching, recording his every move. Maybe it was the witnesses speaking up. Or maybe this was just who Mitchell really was when he thought he could get away with it. Mitchell yanked David away from the patrol car and, without warning, swept his leg, sending David crashing to the ground. With his hands cuffed behind his back, David had no way to break his fall. His face hit the pavement hard, and he felt his lips split open immediately. The taste of blood filled his mouth. "Stay down," Mitchell growled, pressing his knee into David's back, right between his shoulder blades. The weight was crushing, making it hard to breathe. David tried to turn his head to the side, tried to get air into his lungs. "Can't breathe," he managed to gasp out. "Should have thought about that earlier," Mitchell said, pressing down harder. The woman's voice cut through the air, high and panicked. "You're killing him. Get off him. Someone call for help." "I am the help, lady," Mitchell shot back. "And this suspect is resisting arrest." "He's not resisting. He's handcuffed on the ground. You're assaulting him." David could hear more voices now, more people gathering. The gas station was no longer quiet. People were shouting, some at Mitchell, some into their phones calling 911, some just expressing shock at what they were witnessing. Through his blurred vision, David could see at least 5 phones pointed in his direction, all recording. Mitchell shifted his weight, grinding his knee harder into David's back. David heard something pop, felt a sharp pain shoot through his ribs. That would be at least 1 cracked rib, maybe 2. He'd broken ribs before, years ago during hand-to-hand combat training. He knew that feeling. Please, David said, his voice strained. You've already arrested me. This isn't necessary. I'll decide what's necessary, Mitchell snarled. He grabbed David's cuffed hands and twisted them upward, sending another wave of pain through David's shoulders. You want to file a complaint? Go ahead. You think anyone's going to believe you over me? You think your word means anything? That's when David heard it. Mitchell's voice dropping lower, meant just for him. The words that confirmed everything David had suspected about this man. Your kind always causes problems. Always playing victim, always crying racism. Well, let me tell you something. In my town, you follow the rules, my rules. And if you don't, this is what happens. David's FBI training had prepared him for a lot of things. Interrogations, gunfights, undercover work in dangerous situations. But nothing quite prepared you for the reality of being brutalized while helpless, of having your humanity stripped away by someone who was supposed to serve and protect. The anger he felt was overwhelming, but he channeled it into focus. Remember everything. Every word. Every action. The older man who'd been recording stepped closer, his voice shaking but determined. Officer, I'm a veteran. I served this country for 24 years. And what you're doing right now, this isn't protecting and serving. This is abuse of power. I've got everything on camera and I'm sending it to every news station in the state. Mitchell finally looked up, and for the first time David saw something flicker across the officer's face. Not regret, not exactly, but maybe the first hint of awareness that this might not go the way he planned. You don't know what you're talking about, old man. This suspect is dangerous. He's handcuffed on the ground, not moving. The only dangerous person here is you. Mitchell stood up, finally taking his weight off David's back. David sucked in a desperate breath, his lungs burning. But the relief was short-lived. Mitchell grabbed the chain between his cuffs again and hauled him to his feet. David's legs were shaky, his head spinning from lack of oxygen. That's when Mitchell saw David's face clearly for the first time since the assault began. The blood running from his split lip, the scrape on his cheek from the pavement, the eye that was already starting to swell. Even Mitchell seemed to pause, as if some small part of him recognized he'd gone too far. But he didn't apologize. Didn't show remorse. Instead, he pushed David toward the patrol car. Get in. David stumbled forward, barely staying on his feet. His ribs screamed with every movement. His wrists were numb from the tight cuffs. His face throbbed with pain. He'd been in tough spots before, had injuries from operations that had gone sideways. But this was different. This was senseless, unprovoked, and completely unjust. Mitchell opened the back door of the patrol car and put his hand on David's head, shoving him into the back seat. But instead of guiding him carefully like proper procedure dictated, Mitchell used force, deliberately banging David's head against the doorframe as he pushed him in. David saw stars again, felt warmth running down the side of his face. More blood, probably a gash above his eyebrow this time. He slumped into the back seat, trying to position himself so his injured ribs weren't pressed against anything. Mitchell slammed the door shut and walked around to the driver's side. Before getting in, he addressed the crowd that had gathered, about 8 or 9 people now, all with their phones out. Show's over, folks. This man is under arrest for robbery, resisting arrest, and assault on a police officer. If anyone interferes with his transport to the station, you'll be arrested too. And those recordings? They just show me doing my job, subduing a dangerous suspect. Now clear out before I run all your plates and find reasons to bring you in too. The threat hung in the air. Some people started backing toward their cars, scared. But the veteran stood his ground. So did the woman who'd first spoken up. And the teenager who looked terrified but determined. We know what we saw, the veteran said firmly. And the truth is going to come out. Mitchell laughed, actually laughed. Truth? Let me tell you about truth, old-timer. The truth is whatever I write in my report. And my report is going to say this thug attacked me, and I had to use necessary force to subdue him. That's the truth that matters. He got into the patrol car and looked at David through the rear-view mirror. You comfortable back there? No good, get used to it. You're going to be very uncomfortable for a long time. As Mitchell pulled out of the gas station, David let his head rest against the window. Every part of his body hurt. He could see his reflection in the glass, barely recognizing himself. Blood on his face, one eye swollen nearly shut, his shirt torn and dirty. But through the pain, through the humiliation, David's mind was already working. He was counting the violations, the excessive force, the unprovoked assault. He was remembering the witnesses, the recordings, the veteran's words. Most importantly, He was thinking about what would happen when the truth came out. Not just about who he was, but about everything Mitchell had done. The officer was still talking, still running his mouth as he drove. Making threats, using slurs, digging himself deeper with every word. David didn't respond. Didn't engage. He just listened, remembered, and waited. Because Officer Mitchell had made a catastrophic mistake. He'd assaulted a federal agent. He'd violated civil rights on camera. He'd shown his true nature to multiple witnesses. And soon, very soon, the walls were going to come crashing down around him. David closed his good eye and focused on breathing through the pain. He'd been through worse, though not much worse. And he'd survived this too. But Mitchell's life as he knew it was over. He just didn't know it yet. The precinct was busy when Mitchell dragged David through the doors. Officers were moving between desks, phones were ringing, and the usual chaos of a Tuesday evening shift filled the air. Several officers looked up when Mitchell came in with his bloodied prisoner, but most quickly looked away. That bothered David more than he'd expected. These were people who'd sworn an oath to uphold justice, and they couldn't even meet his eyes. "Got a live one here?" Mitchell announced loudly, pushing David forward. "Robbery suspect. Resisted arrest. Assaulted an officer. The works." A female officer at the front desk, her nameplate reading Sergeant Hayes, frowned as she looked David over. "He needs medical attention, Mitchell." "Look at him. He's fine. Just a few bumps from resisting." "That's more than a few bumps," Hayes insisted, standing up. "His face is covered in blood and he's holding his ribs like they're broken. We need to call a paramedic." "I said he's fine, Sergeant. Just process him." Hayes and Mitchell locked eyes for a moment, and David could see the conflict there. Hayes clearly wasn't happy, but she also wasn't willing to push it further. That told David something important about the culture here, about who had power and who didn't. She sighed and pulled out the paperwork. "Name? David Carter," he answered, his voice rough. Speaking hurt his ribs, but he needed to stay alert, stay engaged. Mitchell stepped closer, his breath on David's neck. "Address?" David gave his real address, the one on his genuine driver's license. He wasn't using a fake identity for this operation. He'd been working in his actual capacity as an FBI agent, just not advertising it. The booking process was humiliating by design. Photos from every angle, capturing every injury. Fingerprints, though David's were already in the system from his FBI employment. A property bag for his belongings. His wallet, phone, keys, all taken away. His belt and shoelaces removed. He was put in an orange jumpsuit that was too big, making him look smaller, more vulnerable than he actually was. Through it all, Mitchell hovered nearby, adding commentary, making jokes about David to other officers. Some laughed. Others stayed quiet but didn't object. That silence was its own form of complicity. "He keeps saying he wants a lawyer," Mitchell told another officer, loud enough for David to hear. "Like they all do. Thinks he's going to sue the department or something." "I have the right to a phone call," David said clearly, looking at Sergeant Hayes. "Federal law requires it." "You'll get your call," Hayes said. But she didn't make any move to provide a phone. "Let's finish processing first," Mitchell smirked. "Yeah, finish processing. Then maybe we'll think about that call. If we remember." David knew this tactic. Delay the phone call, make the suspect sweat, hope they'll get desperate and start talking. It was borderline illegal, definitely unethical, and completely predictable. He'd seen it in training videos, had studied cases where it led to false confessions. But David wasn't going to confess to anything, because he hadn't done anything. He just needed to wait for the right moment. His team at the FBI would realize something was wrong soon. He'd missed his evening check-in, and protocol dictated that after 4 hours of no contact, they'd start tracing his location. They led him to a holding cell, a small concrete room with a metal bench and a toilet. The door clanged shut behind him with a sound that echoed in the small space. David sat down carefully, favoring his injured ribs, and finally allowed himself to really assess his situation. His face hurt like hell. One eye was nearly swollen shut now, and the cut above his eyebrow kept bleeding despite the crude bandage someone had slapped on it during booking. His lip was split and puffy. His ribs were definitely cracked, maybe worse. Every breath was painful. His wrists were raw and bleeding from the tight handcuffs which they'd finally removed. But physical pain was manageable. David had been through worse in his career. What really bothered him was the bigger picture he was starting to see. This wasn't just one bad cop having a bad day. The way the other officers had reacted, or more accurately, hadn't reacted, told him this was systemic. Mitchell felt comfortable treating people this way because he'd done it before, and nobody had stopped him. David thought about the corruption investigation that had brought him to this town in the first place. He'd been tracking financial irregularities, bribery, connections between local officials and organized crime. But maybe he'd been looking at the wrong thing. Maybe the corruption wasn't just about money. Maybe it was about power, about who got to abuse it and who suffered because of it. He could hear voices outside his cell. Mitchell was still there, talking to other officers. David moved closer to the door, listening. Same thing every time. They never just comply. Always got to make it difficult. Did he really assault you? Another voice asked. Younger, less certain. He swung at me at the gas station. I've got witnesses. Mitchell's voice was confident, practiced. He'd told this lie before, David realized. Maybe many times. There were people recording though, right? Someone said it's already on social media. So what? Videos don't show everything. They don't show what happened before I turned on my lights. They don't show him threatening me. My word versus his, and I've got the badge. Who do you think they're going to believe? David's jaw clenched. Mitchell wasn't just confident. He was arrogant. He genuinely believed he was untouchable. And based on past experience, he probably had good reason to think that. Hours passed. David tried to rest, but the pain made it impossible to find a comfortable position. His eye had swollen completely shut now. The bleeding from his eyebrow had finally stopped. But the whole side of his face felt hot and tight. He knew he looked bad, and that worried him. Head injuries were serious. Cracked ribs were serious. He needed proper medical care, not just a bandage and some aspirin. Around midnight, the holding cell area got quiet. The evening shift was wrapping up, night shift taking over. David heard new voices, different officers starting their rounds. One of them walked past his cell and stopped. Man, what happened to you? The officer was younger, maybe late 20s, with a look of genuine concern. Officer Mitchell arrested me at a gas station. I wasn't doing anything wrong. The young officer glanced around, then leaned closer to the bars. Did you really resist arrest? David met his eyes. I never resisted. I complied with every order. There were multiple people recording the whole thing. The videos will show what really happened. The officer looked uncomfortable, like he wanted to say something but didn't know if he should. Finally, he spoke quietly. Look, I'm new here. Just graduated from the academy 6 months ago. But I've heard things about Mitchell. Stories, and I've seen how some of the guys act around him like they're scared of him or something. What kind of stories? David asked, though he could guess. Complaints that disappear. Arrests that don't quite add up. People getting hurt during processing. Nothing anyone can prove, or at least nothing anyone's willing to prove. He shook his head. I didn't sign up for this. I wanted to help people, you know. Keep my community safe. But this, what's your name, officer? Thompson. Officer Brian Thompson. Thompson, I appreciate you talking to me. Takes courage to question what you're seeing. David paused, making a decision. I'm going to tell you something, but I need you to listen carefully and not overreact. Can you do that? Thompson nodded, looking nervous but curious. I'm not just a random guy Mitchell picked up. I'm a federal agent, FBI. I've been working undercover in this area for months. Mitchell assaulted a federal officer tonight on camera in front of multiple witnesses. And when the truth comes out, everything is going to change around here. Thompson's eyes went wide. You're serious? You're FBI? Completely serious. My credentials are in my wallet, which is in property. My team knows I'm here by now. They're probably already making calls, working their way through the system. In a few hours, this whole place is going to be swarming with federal investigators. Oh man, Mitchell's going to... Thompson looked genuinely scared now, but not for himself. Scared of what was coming, of how bad this was going to get. Thompson, listen to me. You seem like a good officer, someone who actually cares about doing the right thing. When everything hits the fan, and it will, you're going to have to make a choice. You can stand with the truth, or you can stand with people like Mitchell. That choice is going to define your career. Before Thompson could respond, they heard footsteps. Heavy, familiar boots. Mitchell was coming back. Get away from there, Thompson, Mitchell barked. Don't talk to the prisoners. How many times do I have to tell you rookies that? Thompson jumped back from the cell, nodding quickly. Yes, sir. Sorry, sir. I was just doing cell checks. Mitchell came into view, looking at David with satisfaction. Still in there, huh? Good, get comfortable. You're going to be here a while. We're real backed up on processing tonight. Might not get to your phone call until morning. Might be even longer. These things happen. David didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Mitchell was enjoying his power, savoring what he thought was his victory. Let him enjoy it while it lasted. Because in a few hours, maybe less, Agent David Carter was going to become Officer Mitchell's worst nightmare. And every officer who'd looked the other way, every sergeant who'd let this behavior slide, David must have dozed off despite the pain, because he woke to the sound of raised voices echoing through the precinct. His working eye opened slowly, crusted with dried blood. His whole body ached, and for a moment he forgot where he was. Then it all came rushing back. The gas station, Mitchell, the assault, the cell. But these voices were different, angrier, more authoritative. David pushed himself up from the bench, wincing at the sharp pain in his ribs, and moved toward the cell door to listen. Where is he? Where's the man Mitchell brought in tonight? The voice was commanding, used to being obeyed. Not a local cop's voice. Sir, I need to see some identification before I can... That was Sergeant Hayes, sounding nervous now. Here's my identification. Special Agent Raymond Price, FBI. And here's a federal warrant for access to your holding cells. Now I'll ask you one more time. Where is Agent David Carter? The entire precinct seemed to go silent. David could picture it. Every officer freezing at their desk, every conversation stopping mid-sentence. The words FBI and Agent David Carter hanging in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. I don't... Hayes was stammering now. Mitchell brought in a suspect named David Carter, but he said he was arrested for robbery and assault on an officer. He didn't say anything about where is he. Price wasn't asking anymore. He was demanding. Cell Block B, Cell 3, Hayes said quickly. But sir, I need to inform you that the suspect, Agent Carter, he's injured. Mitchell said it was from resisting arrest, but David didn't hear the rest. Footsteps were thundering toward the holding cells, multiple people moving fast. Then his cell door was in view, and David saw them. Agent Raymond Price, his supervisor and mentor of 10 years, looking angrier than David had ever seen him. Behind him were 2 more FBI agents and another man in a sharp suit who David recognized as Captain Robert Chen, head of the local FBI field office. Price took one look at David through the bars and his face went pale. Jesus Christ! Open this cell, now! A local officer fumbled with keys, hands shaking so badly he dropped them twice before getting the door open. The moment it swung wide, Price was inside, his hands on David's shoulders, looking him over with obvious concern. David, can you hear me? Can you walk? I'm okay, David said, though his voice was rough and the words clearly hurt to say. Looks worse than it is. The hell it does, Price snapped. Then over his shoulder, we need paramedics here immediately. And I want Officer Mitchell in an interrogation room right now. Not his interrogation room. Ours. Captain Chen was on his phone already, barking orders. The 2 other agents helped David out of the cell, supporting him on either side. As they moved through the holding area toward the main precinct, David saw what he'd expected. Every officer in the building was staring. Some looked shocked. Some looked scared. And a few looked angry, like they resented the intrusion. Then David saw Mitchell. The officer was standing near the booking desk, his face a mixture of confusion and growing horror as he realized what was happening. When his eyes met David's, understanding flooded in. His mouth opened, then closed. No words came out. Officer Mitchell, Agent Price said, his voice cold as ice. You're being detained for questioning regarding your assault on a federal officer. You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you use it, because anything you say right now is going into a federal report that will be used in your prosecution. I didn't know, Mitchell said, his voice barely above a whisper. He didn't tell me he was FBI. He looked like... He stopped himself, but everyone heard what he'd been about to say. He looked like what, officer? Captain Chen stepped forward, his face hard. Please finish that sentence. I'm very interested in what you were about to say. Mitchell's face flushed red. I thought he was a suspect. He matched a description. I had probable cause to. You had nothing, Price interrupted. There was no robbery. We've already checked with dispatch. No calls came in about any robbery tonight. You made that up. And even if there had been a real robbery, nothing, and I mean nothing, justifies what you did to this man. We have the videos, Mitchell. Multiple angles. We've already watched them. We know exactly what happened. That's when David noticed other people entering the precinct. Men and women in business suits carrying briefcases and badges. Internal affairs. Federal prosecutors. This wasn't just about David anymore. This was about everything they'd find once they started really looking. A paramedic team rushed in with a stretcher. They immediately began assessing David, asking him questions, checking his vitals, cataloging his injuries for their report. One of them, a woman with kind eyes, gently cleaned the blood from his face while examining the cut above his eye. "This needs stitches," she said. "Definitely some broken ribs here. Possible concussion. We need to get him to a hospital." "Hospital can wait 5 minutes," David said, looking at Price. "I need to make a statement first. While it's fresh. David, you need medical attention. 5 minutes, Ray, please." Price hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. "Then you're going to the hospital if I have to carry you there myself." They moved David to a conference room, away from the chaos of the main precinct. Someone brought water, which David drank gratefully. His throat was raw from the concrete dust and stress. One of the FBI agents set up a recording device while Captain Chen took out a legal pad. "For the record, this is a voluntary statement from Special Agent David Carter regarding events that occurred on Tuesday, October 8, 2025 at approximately 7:15 p.m. Price began formally. "Agent Carter, in your own words, please describe what happened." David told them everything. Every detail, from pulling into the gas station to Mitchell's first approach to the escalation, the assault, the ride to the station, the holding cell. He kept his voice steady and professional, even when describing the most painful parts. This was evidence now, and evidence needed to be clear and unimpeachable. When he got to the part about Mitchell's knee on his back, about not being able to breathe, Agent Price's jaw clenched so tight David could hear his teeth grinding. When he described the words Mitchell had said, the "you people" comment, the racist implications, Chen was writing furiously, his pen nearly tearing through the paper. "And during all of this, you never identified yourself as a federal agent?" Chen asked. "No, sir. I made the decision not to reveal my identity, because I'm currently working an undercover operation investigating corruption in local law enforcement. Revealing my status would have compromised months of work and potentially allowed guilty parties to destroy evidence or flee. That operation is now your top priority," Price said firmly. "After we get you medical treatment, after you recover, you're going to tell us everything you found. Because I guarantee you Mitchell isn't acting alone. Men like him don't operate in a vacuum. There's a culture here that allows this, that encourages it, and we're going to burn it all down." Through the conference room window, David could see the chaos spreading through the precinct. More officers were arriving. Suits from headquarters, people with cameras and recording equipment. Word was spreading beyond the building, too. He could see reporters setting up outside, news vans pulling into the parking lot. Officer Thompson appeared at the door looking nervous. "Sir, there are reporters outside asking about an FBI agent being assaulted." "How did they find out so fast?" Price smiled grimly. "Because the citizens who recorded the assault sent those videos to every news station in the state. This isn't just a law enforcement matter anymore. This is public. This is national. By tomorrow morning, Officer Mitchell's face is going to be on every news channel in America." Thompson swallowed hard. "What's going to happen to all of us?" "The other officers?" "That depends," Captain Chen said, looking up from his notes. "It depends on who knew what, who saw things and didn't report them, who participated in a culture of abuse and who tried to stop it. I suggest you think very carefully about which side of that line you want to be on, Officer Thompson." "I want to help," Thompson said quickly. "Agent Carter told me earlier that I'd have to make a choice. I'm making it. I'll testify to everything I've seen, everything I've heard. I've only been here 6 months, but I've seen enough." Price nodded approvingly. "That takes courage, son. We'll protect you, but I won't lie, it's going to be rough. Cops who testify against other cops don't have an easy time." "I don't care," Thompson said, and David believed him. "This isn't what I signed up for. This isn't what police work is supposed to be." The paramedic knocked on the door. "Agent Carter really needs to go to the hospital now. His vitals are concerning." David nodded, letting them help him to his feet. As they led him toward the ambulance, he passed Mitchell, who was now sitting in an interrogation room visible through a window, his head in his hands. Their eyes met for just a moment. David didn't feel satisfaction or victory. He felt sad. Sad that it had come to this, that it had taken him being assaulted for the truth to come out. that there were probably dozens or hundreds of other victims who'd never get justice because they didn't have an FBI badge to reveal. But as the ambulance doors closed and he lay back on the stretcher, David knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. The revelation of his identity wasn't the end of the story. It was the opening of a door that once opened couldn't be closed. The hospital was quiet compared to the chaos of the precinct. David lay in a private room, his ribs wrapped tightly, 7 stitches above his eyebrow and more bandages than he could count. The doctors had confirmed 3 cracked ribs, a mild concussion, and various cuts and bruises that would heal with time. They wanted to keep him overnight for observation, which suited David fine. He had a lot of thinking to do. His phone buzzed constantly on the nightstand. News alerts, messages from colleagues, even a few texts from family members who'd seen the videos, because Price had been right. By morning, the story was everywhere. FBI agent assaulted by police officer in shocking video ran on every major news network. The videos from the gas station had gone viral, viewed millions of times in just 12 hours. David's face was all over the internet, though many news outlets had blurred out the worst of the injuries. He'd watched one of the videos on his phone, forcing himself to see what everyone else was seeing. It was hard to watch. Seeing himself on the ground, Mitchell's knee on his back, hearing his own voice saying, "I can't breathe." The woman crying, begging Mitchell to stop. The veterans shaking hands, holding up his phone, determined to capture the truth. Agent Price came in around noon, carrying coffee and looking like he hadn't slept. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck driven by a guy with a badge." Price didn't smile. "David, we need to talk about what happens next. The brass wants you to take medical leave. Let this blow over quietly." "Absolutely not. I told them you'd say that." Price pulled up a chair and sat down heavily. "Listen, this has become huge, bigger than any of us expected. There are protests organizing outside the precinct. Civil rights groups are calling for federal investigations. The mayor is scrambling. The police chief is talking about resigning, and that's just the beginning." "Good," David said firmly. "It should be huge. This isn't just about me, Ray, you know that." "I know. That's why I need to tell you what we found when we started digging into Mitchell's history." Price pulled out a folder thick with papers. 27 complaints filed against him in the past 8 years. 27. Excessive force, racial profiling, falsifying reports. Every single one was dismissed or buried by internal affairs. David's stomach turned. 27 people. 27 times this could have been stopped. It gets worse. We found 6 other cases where people were hospitalized after encounters with Mitchell. All of them were Black or Latino. All of them were charged with resisting arrest. All charges were eventually dropped or pled down to minor offenses, but the arrests stayed on their records. The hospital visits were explained away as necessary force. Who signed off on these complaints? David already knew the answer would make him angry. Sergeant Hayes reviewed most of them. But the real problem is higher up. Deputy Chief Franklin Wilson. He's the one who kept making these complaints disappear. And guess what? Wilson's name keeps popping up in your corruption investigation, too. David sat up straighter, ignoring the pain in his ribs, the bribes, the connections to organized crime. Wilson's involved? Up to his neck, looks like. Mitchell wasn't just a racist cop acting alone. He was useful to Wilson and others. They'd use him to intimidate witnesses, rough up people who might talk, create reasonable doubt in cases by making arrests that couldn't stick. And nobody questioned it because, well, Price gestured at David's injuries. Because this is what happened to people who questioned things. The door opened and Captain Chen walked in, followed by a woman David didn't recognize. She was in her 50s, wearing a sharp suit, and carried herself with the authority of someone used to being in charge. "Agent Carter, I'm Director Patricia Walsh, head of the FBI's Civil Rights Division. I flew in this morning specifically to meet with you." David tried to sit up more formally, but Walsh waved him off. "Stay comfortable, Agent. You've been through enough." She pulled up another chair. "I've reviewed everything. The videos, your statement, Officer Thompson's testimony, and the preliminary findings from the corruption investigation. Agent Carter, what happened to you is unconscionable, but it's also, unfortunately, the opening we need to clean house in this department. Ma'am, I want to continue my investigation. I want to finish this. I appreciate your dedication, but you're now a key witness in multiple federal cases. Your cover is blown. We need a pivot strategy. Walsh pulled out her own tablet, pulling up documents. Here's what we're proposing. A full civil rights investigation into the entire police department. Pattern and practice. We'll look at every arrest, every complaint, every use of force incident for the past decade, and we want you to be part of the team leading that investigation. What about Mitchell? Officer Mitchell is being charged federally with deprivation of rights under color of law, assault of a federal officer, and filing false reports. He's also facing state charges. His badge has been stripped and he's being held without bail. But Mitchell is small potatoes, Agent Carter. The real target is the system that created him and protected him. David's phone buzzed again. This time it was a notification from a news site. Gas station videos spark national conversation on police reform. He showed it to Walsh. That's the other thing we need to discuss, she said carefully. You've become the face of this issue whether you intended to or not. The media wants interviews. Civil rights organizations want you to speak at rallies. Everyone wants a piece of you. I'm not interested in being famous. I'm interested in justice, I understand. But your voice matters here. People are listening. The videos show what happened. But you can explain why it matters, why the corruption goes deeper, why reform is necessary. Walsh leaned forward. I'm not ordering you to do press. That's your choice. But I am telling you that you have an opportunity to make real change here. Price added. The protests outside the precinct? They're peaceful, but they're growing. People are angry. They want answers. They want accountability. You could give them that. David looked out the hospital window. He could see the city beyond. The same city where he'd spent months working undercover, trying to build a case against corrupt officials. The same city where Mitchell felt comfortable brutalizing people. The same city where 27 complaints went nowhere. I'll do the interviews, he decided, but on my terms. I'm not going to let them make this about me. This is about everyone who didn't have a badge to reveal. Everyone who went through what I went through but had no recourse, no power, no way to fight back. Walsh nodded approvingly. That's exactly the right approach. We'll set up a press conference for tomorrow if you're feeling up to it. Let the doctors clear you first. Over the next several hours, David's hospital room became a command center. Agents came and went, bringing updates, asking questions, coordinating the expanding investigation. David learned that the videos had sparked similar investigations in 3 other cities. Police departments across the country were reviewing their own use of force policies, scared they might be next. Officer Thompson came by in the evening, out of uniform and looking nervous. Agent Carter, I hope it's okay that I came. I just wanted to see how you were doing. Come in, Thompson, and call me David. Thompson approached the bed hesitantly. I gave my full statement to the FBI today. Everything I've seen, everyone I've heard make racist comments. Every time I saw something wrong and didn't speak up. I know it doesn't make up for not saying something sooner, but you're speaking up now, David interrupted. That takes courage, especially knowing what it's going to cost you. I'm being transferred to a different precinct. For my own safety, they said. Some of the guys, they're not happy that I testified. They think I'm a traitor. Thompson's voice was shaky, but David could hear the resolve underneath. But I keep thinking about those videos. About you on the ground. About Mitchell saying those things. And I realize that if I stay silent, I'm just as guilty as he is. You're going to have a rough road ahead, David said honestly. Cops who testify against other cops get isolated, threatened, sometimes worse. But the Bureau will have your back. And more importantly, you'll be able to look at yourself in the mirror. After Thompson left, David was finally alone with his thoughts. He picked up his phone and scrolled through the messages. There were hundreds now. Some from colleagues offering support, some from strangers sharing their own stories of police misconduct, and a few inevitably from people defending Mitchell, saying David must have done something to provoke the attack. Those messages stung worse than his injuries. The idea that some people looked at the videos, saw everything that happened and still found a way to blame him. But David knew that was part of the problem too. The ingrained assumptions, the biases that made people see a black man and automatically assume guilt. His sister called. They talked for an hour, her crying most of the time, David reassuring her he was okay. His mother called after that, angry and scared and proud all at once. His niece, only 8 years old, got on the phone and asked him if he was a hero now. No, sweetheart, David told her. I'm just doing my job. But you're on TV and Mommy said you're brave. Being brave isn't about being on TV. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. Even when you're scared. After he hung up, David thought about that conversation. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. at the Federal Building downtown. David had been discharged from the hospital that morning with strict instructions to take it easy, which he'd promptly ignored. He stood in front of the mirror in his apartment, adjusting his tie with careful movements that wouldn't aggravate his still healing ribs. The stitches above his eyebrow were visible, a stark reminder of what had happened. His eye was still bruised, though the swelling had gone down. He'd considered wearing makeup to cover the worst of it, but Agent Price had talked him out of it. "Let them see," Price had said. "Let them see what Mitchell did. The truth needs to be visible." Now, standing at a podium surrounded by microphones and cameras, David understood what Price meant. The room was packed with reporters, cameras from every major network, journalists from newspapers and websites he'd read his whole life. Behind him stood Director Walsh, Agent Price, Captain Chen, and several other FBI officials. To his left, he could see the families of other victims. People who'd been assaulted by Mitchell over the years, finally getting their moment to be heard. David cleared his throat and began. "My name is Special Agent David Carter. 8 days ago, I was assaulted by Officer Derek Mitchell at a gas station while I was off duty. You've all seen the videos. You know what happened. But what you might not know is why I'm standing here today and what we've discovered since that night." He paused, gathering his thoughts. This was harder than he'd expected, speaking about personal trauma in front of hundreds of people, but it was necessary. "I could have revealed my identity as an FBI agent that night. One flash of my badge and the assault probably would have stopped. But I didn't, because I was working an undercover investigation into corruption in local law enforcement. What I didn't know then, but what we've discovered since, is that Officer Mitchell's attack on me wasn't random. It was part of a pattern of abuse that goes back years and reaches into the highest levels of the department." Behind him, he heard Director Walsh shifting, giving him silent support to continue. "In the past week, the FBI has uncovered evidence that connects my original corruption investigation with a systematic pattern of civil rights violations. Officer Mitchell has 27 complaints against him dating back 8 years. Not one was properly investigated. Not one resulted in discipline. And we now know why." David pulled out a sheet of paper, though he'd memorized the contents. He wanted the reporters to see that this was documented, official, real. Deputy Chief Franklin Wilson, who was supposed to oversee internal investigations, was taking bribes from organized crime figures. In exchange, he provided protection for certain criminal enterprises. But he needed muscle. People who could intimidate witnesses, make cases go away, create doubt in prosecutions. Officer Mitchell was one of those people. And his racist behavior, his brutal tactics, they were a feature, not a bug. They were useful. The room exploded with shouted questions. David raised a hand, asking for quiet. "I'll take questions in a moment, but I need to finish this because it's important." He looked directly into the cameras. "What happened to me happens every day in this country. The only difference is that I had a badge to reveal. I had the power of the FBI behind me. But what about the 27 people who complained about Mitchell before me? What about the 6 people who were hospitalized after encounters with him? What about the hundreds of others who were harassed, profiled, and abused but never filed complaints because they didn't think anyone would believe them?" His voice grew stronger, more passionate. The pain in his ribs faded into background noise as adrenaline took over. "Those people are the real victims here. I survived. I'll heal. I have a good job to go back to, and the support of an entire federal agency. But Mrs. Gloria Henderson, who's sitting right there." David pointed to an older black woman in the front row, tears streaming down her face. "Her son James was beaten by Officer Mitchell 3 years ago. He spent 2 weeks in the hospital. He was charged with resisting arrest, assault on an officer, and drug possession. All charges were eventually dropped, but not before James lost his job, his apartment, and his faith in the justice system. He was 23 years old, going to community college, working part-time at a grocery store. His crime? Walking home from work at night in what Mitchell decided was the wrong neighborhood." Mrs. Henderson was sobbing now. The woman next to her, another victim's family member, put an arm around her shoulders. "Or take Andre Johnson, who's standing in the back." A young man raised his hand, his face set in hard lines. "Mitchell pulled him over for a broken tail light 2 years ago. What should have been a simple ticket turned into an hour-long ordeal where Mitchell searched his car illegally. found nothing, and then arrested him anyway for suspicious behavior. Andre spent the night in jail. He missed his daughter's birthday, and when he tried to file a complaint, it disappeared into Deputy Chief Wilson's office, never to be seen again. David paused to let that sink in. He could see reporters furiously taking notes, cameras zooming in on the victims' faces. The investigation we've launched isn't just about Officer Mitchell or Deputy Chief Wilson, though they'll both face justice. This is about a culture of abuse that was allowed to flourish because the people who were supposed to stop it were corrupt. It's about a system that values the word of officers over the rights of citizens. It's about the assumption that if someone's arrested, they must have done something wrong, even when the evidence says otherwise. He took a breath, feeling the weight of what he was about to say next. We've now identified 12 officers, including Mitchell, who were part of this network. We've documented over 100 civil rights violations spanning 10 years. We've found evidence of planted evidence, falsified reports, and systematic targeting of minority communities. And we've traced bribes totaling over $3 million that went into the pockets of Deputy Chief Wilson and 2 city council members. The room erupted again. David waited for quiet, then continued. But here's what gives me hope. For every corrupt officer we've found 3 good ones who wanted to speak up but were afraid. Officers like Brian Thompson, who testified despite threats to his safety. Sergeants like Linda Hayes, who kept detailed private records of complaints she knew were being buried, waiting for someone to finally listen. These are the real heroes. The ones who stayed true to their oath even when it was dangerous. Director Walsh stepped forward, joining David at the podium. The FBI is committed to a complete overhaul of this department. We'll be implementing a consent decree with federal oversight. Every officer will undergo retraining. The entire command structure will be replaced. Body cameras will be mandatory and constantly audited, and there will be a civilian oversight board with real power to investigate complaints and discipline officers. A reporter shouted, "Agent Carter, do you think this is just a problem in this one city? Or is it systemic across the country?" David looked at Director Walsh, who nodded for him to answer. "I think what we found here exists in varying degrees in departments across America. The specific details might be different, but the underlying problems are the same. Lack of accountability, cultures that protect bad officers, systems that value loyalty over justice, and most importantly, the devaluing of black and brown lives." He paused, "But I also think we can fix it. It won't be easy and it won't happen overnight. But if we're willing to do the hard work of reform, if we're willing to root out corruption wherever we find it, if we're willing to listen to the communities who've been saying these things for decades, then yes, we can fix it." Another reporter. "What would you say to Officer Mitchell if he was here today?" David considered the question carefully. "I'd say that he had a choice every time he put on that uniform. He could have chosen to serve with honor, to protect and serve all people equally. Instead, he chose power, chose cruelty, chose racism, and now he'll face the consequences of those choices. But more than that, I'd want him to understand that the damage he did goes beyond the physical injuries. He damaged trust. He damaged communities. He damaged the reputation of good officers who do this job the right way. That's a wound that takes much longer to heal." The questions continued for another 30 minutes. David answered them all as honestly as he could, sometimes deferring to Director Walsh or Agent Price when the questions got into specific legal territory. Throughout it all, he kept coming back to the victims, making sure their stories were heard, their names remembered. When it finally ended, David was exhausted. His ribs were screaming, his head pounded, and he just wanted to lie down. But as he left the podium, Mrs. Henderson approached him. She grabbed his hands, her own trembling. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not forgetting about James. Thank you for making them listen." "I'm sorry it took so long," David replied, his own eyes getting wet. "I'm sorry you had to wait for someone like me, someone with power, before anyone paid attention. But they're paying attention now," she said firmly. "That's what matters. They're finally paying attention." That evening, David sat in the FBI conference room with the full investigative team. Spread across the table were files, evidence logs, interview transcripts, and photographs. The scope of what they'd uncovered was staggering. 6 months had passed since that night at the gas station. David sat in the federal courthouse watching as the jury filed back into the courtroom. They'd been deliberating for 3 days on the charges against Officer Derek Mitchell. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled with victims, family members, reporters, and concerned citizens who'd followed this case from the beginning. Mitchell sat at the defense table, looking smaller somehow than he had that night. His lawyer, expensive and well-dressed, tried to maintain a confident expression, but David could see the tension in his shoulders. Mitchell didn't look at David once. He'd avoided eye contact throughout the entire trial. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Justice Margaret Huang, called for order. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." The jury foreman, a middle-aged man who'd taken detailed notes throughout the trial, stood up with papers in his hand. "On the charge of deprivation of civil rights under color of law, how do you find?" "Guilty." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Mitchell's head dropped. His lawyer put a hand on his shoulder. "On the charge of assault of a federal officer?" "Guilty." "On the charge of filing false police reports?" "Guilty." One by one, the foreman read through all 17 counts. Guilty on every single one. The evidence had been overwhelming. The videos, the testimony from witnesses, David's own statement, the pattern of past behavior that the judge had allowed into evidence. Mitchell's defense had tried to argue fear, split-second decision-making, and the difficulty of police work. But the jury had seen through it all. Mrs. Henderson, sitting in the row behind David, let out a sob. Not of sadness, but of relief. Her son James squeezed her hand. Andre Johnson, the young man who'd been arrested for a broken taillight, had tears streaming down his face. Around the courtroom, people who'd been victims of Mitchell's abuse were crying, hugging, finally allowing themselves to feel that justice was real. Justice Huang banged her gavel, calling for order. "Mr. Mitchell, please stand." Mitchell rose shakily, his lawyer beside him. "Mr. Mitchell, a jury of your peers has found you guilty on all counts. These are serious crimes, representing not just a violation of the law, but a violation of the trust that citizens place in those who wear the badge. You were given power and authority to protect people, and you use that power to harm them, to terrorize them, to rob them of their dignity and freedom." The judge paused, letting her words sink in. "I've read the victim impact statements. I've heard the testimony of people whose lives you damaged, and I've watched the videos of your assault on Special Agent Carter. Videos that show clearly a man who felt entitled to brutalize another human being for no reason other than the color of his skin. This court finds your actions reprehensible and deserving of the maximum sentence allowed by law." Mitchell's knees buckled slightly. His lawyer steadied him. "On the federal charges, you are sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. On the state charges, which will run consecutively, an additional 3 years. You will also be required to pay restitution to all victims and are permanently barred from serving in any law enforcement capacity. Bailiff, please take the defendant into custody." Mitchell's face went white. As the bailiffs approached with handcuffs, he finally looked at David. There was no defiance in his eyes anymore, no anger or hatred, just fear, and the dawning realization that his life as he knew it was over. The handcuffs clicked into place, the same sound David had heard 6 months ago at that gas station. But now the tables had turned completely. As they led Mitchell away, David felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief, certainly. Satisfaction that justice had been served. But also a deep sadness that it had taken his assault, his FBI credentials, his platform, for this moment to happen. How many other Mitchells were still out there, still abusing their power, still getting away with it because their victims didn't have badges to reveal? Outside the courthouse, David stood at another podium for another press conference. But this time he wasn't alone. Beside him stood Mrs. Henderson, Andre Johnson, and 5 other victims who'd found their voices through this process. Behind them, a banner read "Justice for All," held up by community activists who'd organized throughout the trial. Today, Derek Mitchell was held accountable for his crimes, David began. But this verdict isn't just about one man. It's about sending a message that no one is above the law. That badge or no badge, black or white, everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. Andre stepped up to the microphone, his voice shaking but strong. "For 2 years, I thought I was crazy. I thought maybe I had done something wrong. Maybe I deserved what happened to me. But seeing Agent Carter, seeing someone with power go through the same thing, it helped me understand that it wasn't my fault. Mitchell was the problem, not us." Mrs. Henderson spoke next, her voice clear despite her tears. "My son James couldn't be here today. He's still recovering, not just physically but mentally from what happened. But I want him to know, and I want every person who's been hurt by police abuse to know, that your voice matters. Your story matters, and if you speak up, there are people who will listen. The questions from reporters were different this time. Less about the specific case, more about the broader implications. The reforms being implemented, the changes happening across the country. Agent Carter, one reporter asked, the police department has been under federal oversight for 6 months now. What changes have you seen? David nodded to Captain Chen, who stepped forward. We've implemented comprehensive reforms. Every officer now wears a body camera that cannot be turned off during interactions with the public. We've established a civilian oversight board with subpoena power and the authority to discipline officers. We've retrained the entire force on de-escalation techniques and implicit bias, and we've fired or forced into retirement 17 officers who were found to have violated civil rights or participated in the corruption network. What about Deputy Chief Wilson? Another reporter called out. Deputy Chief Wilson pled guilty to federal corruption charges last month, Director Walsh answered, joining them at the podium. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and has agreed to cooperate with ongoing investigations into organized crime connections. 2 city council members have also been indicted and are awaiting trial. But the bigger story, the one that filled David with hope, was happening beyond the headlines. In the 6 months since his assault, the police department had begun to transform. It wasn't perfect, not by a long shot. There was still resistance, still officers who resented the changes, still incidents that required investigation. But there was also something new: accountability. Officer Thompson, the young cop who'd testified despite threats, had been promoted to detective and was now working with the FBI task force on police reform. Sergeant Hayes, who'd kept those secret records for years, was now head of internal affairs, actually investigating complaints instead of burying them. And dozens of officers who'd stayed silent out of fear were now speaking up when they saw problems, knowing their concerns would be heard. The reforms spread beyond that one city. Neighboring departments, watching the federal investigation unfold, began implementing changes voluntarily to avoid similar scrutiny. State legislatures introduced new laws requiring body cameras, limiting qualified immunity, and creating independent investigation boards. It wasn't everything activists had called for, but it was progress. Real, measurable progress. 3 months after the trial, David returned to the gas station where it had all started. It looked the same. Same pumps, same fluorescent lights, same building. But everything felt different. He pulled up to pump 3, the same one he'd been using that night, and got out of his car. The clerk inside recognized him immediately and came running out. Agent Carter, I can't believe you came back here. After everything that happened, had to face it eventually, David said with a small smile. Can't let one bad night keep me from living my life. You're a brave man. What you did, standing up like that, it changed things around here. The cops are different now. More careful. More respectful. David started filling his tank, and as he did, he noticed a young black teenager pulling in at the next pump. The kid saw a police car drive past on the street and tensed up automatically, his body language shifting into defensive mode. David recognized that response. He'd done it himself countless times growing up, that automatic calculation of danger whenever a patrol car appeared. But then the kid noticed David, recognition dawning on his face. Hey, you're that FBI agent. The one from the videos. That's me. Man, what you did was amazing. My dad keeps telling me about it. Says you changed everything. The teenager's whole demeanor shifted, standing taller, less afraid. He says because of you, maybe I don't have to be as scared anymore. David felt a lump in his throat. You should always be aware of your surroundings, always know your rights. But yeah, things are getting better, slowly but better. After the kid drove off, David finished pumping his gas and went inside to grab that coffee he'd been trying to get 6 months ago. The clerk refused to let him pay. Your money's no good here, Agent. Not after what you went through for all of us. David tried to insist, but the clerk was adamant. Finally, David accepted the coffee with gratitude and headed back to his car,